You're listening to Soundside. I'm Soundside producer Sarah Leibovitz. Soundside producer Gabrielle Healy is new to Seattle, and that means she's got a lot of questions about how renting works in our fair city. To answer some of her questions and yours, she sat down with our in-house expert on all things rentals.
If you are signing a new lease or leaving an old one, listen up, because things are changing in the rental market. From new statewide legislation, freezing rent hikes for most tenants at up to 10%, to the Seattle City Council banning the use of algorithmic rent fixing. If you're a renter or a landlord, there is a lot to keep track of. And summer is moving season, prompting lots of questions about the rights for renters regarding repairs, fees, and beyond. I would know I just moved to the city last month. Shout out to the city of Seattle for letting me turn on my electricity just yesterday. So today we are answering my burning questions and yours. We've got an expert with us to help us out. KUOW's design, graphics, and data editor, Teo Popescu. She put together a great explainer on this for KUOW. Teo, welcome.
Hello, and welcome to Seattle. We're glad to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. So as a new renter, I have plenty of questions, like I said, but let's start with the latest news first. Can you explain what these algorithmic rent hikes are and why the city council banned them last week?
Yeah, so if you're a renter in Seattle right now and you have one of those big property management companies as your landlord, they are probably, or have been up until now, using software to decide what your rent is going to be. So that software, the most popular version of it, is called RealPage. And RealPage was actually sued by our Attorney General, Nick Brown. That lawsuit is still in progress, but as part of that filing, the Attorney General's office said that over 800,000 leases were determined, like the price of those leases was determined by RealPage from 2017 through 2024. In a ProPublica investigative report on RealPage, they found that 70% of Belltown apartments were managed by only 10 property managers, all of whom had RealPage accounts. So we're talking about a big part of the city under this thing called RealPage software, okay? And that popularity is key, because the way that RealPage works is that landlords subscribe to the service and then they input all of this data. Some of it is public, like what the advertised price of a unit is, but some of it is private, like how many units do they have vacant? How long have they been vacant? How much are people currently paying for rent, right? The stuff that you wouldn't know unless you were the landlord yourself. And then they feed all that information into an algorithm that then determines a recommended rent price for the landlords, okay? The Attorney General, as well as the Department of Justice, has said that this is essentially colluding on rental prices. Some opponents of software like RealPage have gone as far as to say that it's essentially classic price fixing. They argue that just because it's online doesn't mean it's any different than if all of these landlords got into a room and just agreed on a rental price. So while that is making its way through the courts, Seattle went ahead and just banned this software outright. That ban is on the software itself, any software that kind of works the way that RealPage does. It's also a ban on landlords subscribing or contracting with algorithmic rental software because, right, that data, the fact that they have access to it is part of what makes it so powerful and also part of what potentially makes it colluding and price fixing. So for now, the mayor still needs to sign it, although he said that he will, and then it would go into effect 30 days after he signs it. The penalty, because I know this is what we're all interested in, the penalty if a landlord is caught using this software is $7,500 per violation.
Okay.
So that's where we're at right now with algorithmic rent hikes.
All right. So let's transition now and talk about general rights for tenants. We're going to split this conversation going forward into a few buckets, just like you did in your piece. We'll start with fees, and then we'll talk about repairs. So there are a lot of fees normally associated with moving: the security deposit, the pet deposit, the cleaning fees, those types of things. So can you walk us through what landlords can charge you and what fees aren't legal?
Yeah, so first of all, we need to actually say what fees means, because technically fees are the things that are non-refundable. Deposits have to be 100% refundable. So that already is kind of like a dividing line. If something says it's a deposit, that means you have to be able to get all your money back. If it's a fee, you're going to say goodbye to that money. It's not coming back, okay? Just admit that from the get-go. The only fees The only move-in fees that Seattle allows landlords to charge you are cleaning and screening fees. And those are capped together at 10% of 1 month's rent. Okay. The only exception to that is if the actual cost of doing a screening, of essentially doing like a background check, goes beyond that cap. They are allowed to essentially charge what it costs them to do the screening. I looked at the example from the Seattle Renters Handbook, and they said it costs typically between $25 to $45 per adult. So we're not talking about, a huge amount of money, but it's not insignificant either. Those are the only fees that you are allowed to be asked. But we also have deposits.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yes. So those pet deposits, it is up to 25% of 1 month's rent, but that covers all your pets. That's a thing that I think when I was speaking to people about this, they were surprised that is not per pet. That is all the pets that you have are covered up to 25% of 1 month's rent. And that does not include service animals. Service animals are not pets. You cannot have a pet deposit for a service animal, just as a FYI. Then we have our standard security deposits, which I think we're all pretty aware of. Security deposits have to be between the fees that are non-refundable, so your cleaning and screenings, and your security deposit together have to be capped at 1 month's rent. Okay? So if you, for example, had rent of $1,000, whoa, what a wonderful idea that would be in Seattle.
Whoa.
Your fees could be $100, right? That's 10%.
Got it.
And your security deposit could be up to $900, right? Because in total, that's 1 month's rent. But it could not be more than that because they have to together be 1 month's rent at most, okay? And then there's this other thing that I don't think people are as aware of called a holding deposit.
Okay, tell me more.
So a holding deposit, which again can be up to 25% of 1 month's rent. 25% seems to be this magic number that comes up all the time. A holding deposit is essentially just holding a unit for you while you're either being screened, so they're doing a background check, or before you've actually signed a lease agreement. So maybe you've gone and you've seen a place, you've said you want it, but you haven't actually signed the paperwork. And a holding deposit is only real if it comes with a written receipt with terms. But a holding deposit, again, because it's not a fee, you do get it back. If you fail your application or if the unit fails some sort of housing inspection, you get all that money back. That is not on you. If the landlord approves you, everything goes through, wonderful. That money then gets applied either to the first month of rent or to some other move-in costs like your pet deposit or your security deposit. So that money gets moved to other things. However, if you just decide you don't want to live there, right, you've agreed to everything and then you just change your mind, you're probably on the hook for the holding deposit. You're probably not going to get it back then.
Okay. Got it. All right. The holding deposit. So let's bring in a few listener questions now. We messaged people in the Soundside text club about this segment, and they had a lot of thoughts. Here's one from Allison. She texts us, "Is there a time limit on getting a deposit back? My landlord is 2 years overdue, and I just reminded him." Teo, help Allison out. It has been 2 years. What should Allison know?
Woof. Okay. Well, Allison, I think you might be happy and dismayed to find out that there is indeed a time limit, and that time limit is 30 days after your move out. So within 30 days of you moving out, your landlord either has to return your deposit to you, has to provide you notice of why they're not returning it, so like what they're keeping it for, or has to ask you for extra time in case, like, let's say that you damage something, but they don't know how much it's going to cost to repair yet. They have to write and give you notice like, hey, I don't know how much of this I'm going to need, but I'm going to need some time to figure it out. All of that still has to happen in those first 30 days after your move out. The only thing that is on you in this case is that you have to provide a correct mailing address for them to send you your deposit.
One more listener question here. This is Joe from Redmond. He says he's a landlord and writes in, "Many security deposits are about $1,000, while damages for residents can easily and quickly exceed $10,000. Renters leave units full of junk, destroy floors, walls, and appliances, and can cause major damage which far exceeds security deposit." So there's lots to unpack there. But Teo, renters are supposed to return their apartments in the condition in which they were rented with, quote, reasonable wear and tear. So what counts as reasonable wear and tear?
Okay, so this was one that I loved looking up because I wish the college version of me knew this, because I scrubbed and cleaned my apartment so much trying to move out in college and get that deposit back, not realizing that reasonable wear and tear means like it's okay that you lived there. Like you were supposed to be living there. So it's things like paint is fading, scuff marks on like linoleum, there's wear patterns in the carpet. Like it's not supposed to look like nobody was there while you were living there. The thing that counts as damage, so is not covered by reasonable wear and tear, is anything that comes out of like your negligence or misuse or like accidents. So if you put holes in the wall when you could have used like, you know, the little like temporary glue things, if you broke a window or if you left burn marks in the carpet. But even in that case, like let's say that you did damage something. For example, maybe in college you spilled printer ink all over the carpet in your apartment, just as an example here.
Examples only.
Examples
Not
only.
A real example.
Not at all what happened to me twice. Your landlord has to take into account the depreciated value of that. So if that carpet had been put in that year, sure, that's the cost of a new carpet. But if that carpet was put in like 5 years ago, that is not the same cost. Okay, so depreciated value of the thing that got damaged is part of the calculation when they're assigning the amount that you owe in damages.
We also got a question about cleaning fees from Andrea. Andrea says they're in the process of signing a lease, and the question is long, but to summarize, the lease says there will be a non-refundable cleaning fee of $250. Is it legal to say that part of the deposit will include a non-refundable cleaning fee that is more than 10% of the rent? Is cleaning standard in between tenants, or do tenants always have to pay for that? And if so, can the fee be more than 10% of the rent? So what's the deal here? Are there any rules or regulations on cleaning fees?
Yeah, so cleaning fees are one of the two kinds of fees that landlords are allowed to charge. However, together, both cleaning and screening fees can't exceed 10% of 1 month's rent. Screening fees have a little bit of wiggle room there, but cleaning fees do not. So I think that this listener definitely has a bone to pick about this particular setup. On top of that, although cleaning fees are pretty common, there is a regulation that there's no double dipping. So if they charge you a cleaning fee on move-in, they cannot charge you a cleaning fee when you move out. This is a one-time.
Okay, so lots more to say here. Definitely let's check out Teo's Explainer on KUOW.org for more. But let's shift gears and talk a little bit about repairs. I think most people know that when your rental unit has an issue like a broken window or a leaky faucet, it's up to your landlord or building manager to fix it. But how quickly are they supposed to start repairs on a safety issue, like if your heat isn't turning on in the winter or something like that?
Yeah, so that is what would be called like emergency status #1 priority. So if you're without water, electricity, heat in the winter, or a lifestyle safety issue, the repairs need to start within 24 hours. But here's the kicker. It's within 24 hours of a written request. You have to write your request into your landlord. You can still call them because that might be a faster way to get their attention, but the clock officially, legally starts from that written request.
And for other types of less urgent repairs?
Yeah, so if you have like your refrigerator or some appliance that's not working, stove, oven, or like a plumbing issue with your sink or your bathtub, like a major plumbing issue, that repair has to start within 72 hours. Pretty much everything else is within 10 days.
So I'm not sure if this next question falls into the repair category, but it's kind of on topic, so let's just go with it. We're vibing. Here's another listener question. Kat asks, is the landlord responsible for mold cleanup on windowsills? Teo, what do you think?
Oh, I think so. This is a great question. I went down a mold rabbit hole. I'm just going to tell you right now.
A mold rabbit hole.
A mold rabbit hole.
I can't wait for this.
I cannot advise that people do this, but I did. So first of all, I should state that landlords in Washington state are required to give you information about mold, like health and safety about mold, from the Department of Health when you are a tenant. That should happen no matter what. But in terms of how mold is treated in the relationship between tenants and landlords, the Tenants Union of Washington, which is an advocacy organization that provides a lot of services to tenants, they say that mold is typically seen as a repair request and that landlords are typically required to repair problems that cause the mold in the first place. So like if you have a leak or you have really poor ventilation options, like your exhaust fan in your bathroom isn't working, that's on the landlord. either way, you should document and write in a repair request. That should happen no matter what. But there is kind of a second piece of this. I was looking at all of the kind of clean air mold guidances that were out there in the state. This is the mold rabbit hole I went down.
You're thorough.
Yeah, you gotta do what you gotta do. I was not satisfied with the mold guidance I found, so I went looking elsewhere. And the Northwest Clean Air Agency's mold guidance, that is not in King County, not Seattle, that's a little north, our San Juan Island County folks. They had a really great practical explainer where they were essentially saying, like, yes, absolutely, make sure you put in your repair requests. Mold is no joke, but also your mold happens, and mold is one of those things that if you're ideally in a good tenant-landlord relationship, this should be like both of you are fighting this on both fronts. And that means like landlords really have to be on top of making sure that leaks aren't happening and that ventilation is working well, but also condensation from like living in your unit is a big contributor to mold, actually a big contributor to mold around windowsills too. So it's in this guidance, they essentially say that it's on tenants as well to try to keep condensation under control. So assuming that you have good ventilation, assuming that everything in your unit is working correctly and you don't have leaks, it's on you to make sure you actually use that exhaust fan when you take a shower, right? It's on you to make sure that if your windows are fogging up, you open and get some airflow regularly. They had detailed photos of mold in windowsills where it was because of condensation inside and because of leaks from like landlord neglect. So it can be any and everything. And I found that to be a lot more like practical advice personally. But number one, still put in that repair request. And if your landlord for any of these repair requests refuses to respond or refuses to make a necessary repair, you can call the Seattle Renting in Seattle helpline that is run by the city. They can have an emergency inspector out depending on how what level of emergency it is, either like the next day or within like 10 days. But there's a lot of resources out there to help you if your kind of first round of repair requests doesn't work.
Okay. So a couple takeaways there. Number one, mold happens. Number two, what I feel like you've been stressing is that tenants should make any repair request in writing. So can you explain why that's important?
Yeah, so the first one I kind of mentioned is that repair clock starts with that written notice. So you want to have that no matter what, even if you also call, right? Which most of us probably would if like our heating breaks, right? But it's also protection for you. So in a lot of rental agreements, if you do not immediately notify your landlord when you notice something is wrong, you could be on the hook for damages if it gets worse. So you want to be able to clock, like, I notified my landlord at this time, and a written trail of evidence is your protection in that case. It's also important for you because one of the things that I hope has become kind of evident in the way that we're talking about this is that when it comes to renters' rights, you as the renter are the enforcement. It starts with you. There are a lot of resources out there. When I was researching this, I found both from the city, but also a lot of advocacy organizations that provide help if you find yourself in a situation where you need legal help or moving help. But you are step one in the enforcement process. Okay, so part of that is having written notification of what has been happening with your unit.
All right, we're going to wrap it up soon, but we want to just take a moment to say, we got a lot of people writing in about evictions, and it's a big topic, and we are going to return to it very soon. So please email us your comments and questions at soundside@kuow.org. But in the meantime, Teo, are there one or two big points that you wanted to share with us about tenants' rights regarding evictions?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that if you are finding yourself in a situation where you're being evicted, make sure that you have representation. So in the city of Seattle, every household, every tenant household has the right to counsel, even if you can't afford an attorney. The Housing Justice Project will provide that for you. All that information is available on the Seattle City website, as well as a lot of other advocacy organizations will send you their way. So make sure that you are not going through the eviction process alone. The second thing is that Seattle has a couple of eviction moratoriums. So the first one is the winter eviction moratorium that runs from December 1st through March 1st for moderate income households. That means that moderate income households are protected from eviction during that timeline. That's any household at or below 80% of area median income. There are some exceptions to that eviction moratorium. You can find them online, but typically that is an eviction moratorium because of the weather. We don't want people out in the cold. The other one is the school year eviction moratorium. So that one runs during the Seattle school year. That is September through June. And that essentially applies to any household with children daycare age through high school or with folks employed by the schools. They can't be evicted during the school year. Again, there are exceptions to that one as well that you can find online or on our handy little explainer.
All right. So once again, lots of stuff to get back to here. We will very soon, so stay tuned for that. But if you've been listening to this conversation and are like our listener Allison or any of the other people who wrote in, what are the next steps here? What should you do next if you think that there's action you might need to take?
Yeah, so I will again pitch that the Renting in Seattle helpline that is run by the city is a great first stop, especially for repair-related complaints and questions. But there, again, are a lot of really great advocacy organizations. For security deposits in particular, I found that the Tenants Union of Washington had a really great resource online where they have sample letters to walk you through how to send a letter that is essentially a demand letter for your security deposit back, and then how to go through mediation and what happens next if you do need a lawyer and where you can find that. So again, practical, useful advice for how to make sure that your rights are actionable. But also, Seattle has this big, beautiful renter's handbook available online, available as a printable piece in multiple languages. At the end of that handbook, there is a list of very specialized resources. So that's things like a resource for queer folks who are dealing with very specific housing-related issues with their landlord, things like that. So if you are having a very specific renter rights problem, you might have an organization in town that knows exactly how to help you with that. So I would look through the Renter's Handbook. It's 60 pages, but I promise you most of them are illustrations and really pretty. So you're not going to be reading 60 pages to get to the info, I promise.
We've been talking with KUOW's design, graphics, and data editor, Teo Popescu, about rights for renters in Seattle. Teo, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Lots to cover, and look for our conversation about tenants' rights and evictions sometime soon. You are listening to Soundside. I'm producer Gabrielle Healy.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.